Who wants to be happy?
I do.
If your hand's not up, I don't know. Who doesn't? Who doesn't want to be happy? Did you know that last year, in one 3-month period, 1,000 books were released on Amazon.com on happiness? In 1 year. In 3 months, in 1 year. 1,000 books on happiness. Do you think we as a culture are invested in happiness? A little bit. Are you expecting me not to say that we should not be invested in happiness? You won't hear me say that. But here's a phenomenon that I and some others have noticed. And check this out. Check this phenomenon out in your own mind to see if it's true in your experience. For others, as well as for yourself. When we talk about our pastimes, our life story, we don't simply talk about all those happy times, do we? Don't we often recount the trials, the tribulations, the challenges that we have overcome and endured? I know I do. And that's not wrong. I don't think there's any low vibrational thinking involved in talking about what we really experienced, what was really a challenge, what was really daunting, in talking about when we suffered, whether it was physical suffering or emotional suffering. We shoot for happiness, but we are formed through suffering. There was a sage and a teacher, and he was speaking to one of his students on the roots of suffering. And he shared with his student this. Well, he said of this, the root of suffering, and he was speaking about money at the time, about money. And he said of it, it can buy you a bed, but not sleep. It can buy you a clock, but not time. It can buy you a book, but not knowledge. It can buy you a position, but not respect. It can buy you medicine, but not health. It can buy you blood, but not life. So you see, money can't buy everything. In fact, it's often the cause for pain and suffering. And I tell you all this because I am your friend. And as your friend, I want to relieve, I want to take away your pain and your suffering. So send me all your money, and I will suffer for you. I don't think there's anyone, we'll ask formally later on in the service, I don't think there's anyone here for the first time, but if you're here for the first time, that little story is diametrically opposed to what we teach. Like you, I love being happy. I love being happy. But I do not ever recall in my life saying, wow, all that happiness really changed me, really formed me, really rendered me. I don't recall that. Happiness beckons us, and again, this isn't wrong, it beckons us to maximize our benefits. What does he mean, benefits? I'm at Cedar Point. How many brides can I fit into one day? I'm out west. Can I climb both the north and the south rim in one weekend? Can I do it all? And at an earlier time when I was a kid, and someone gave me $1. I looked at that dollar and I wondered, how many pieces of candy can I buy for this $1? And back then, quite a few. I was astounded. Remember penny candy? And who's old enough to remember penny candy? 100 pieces. Was I happy? You better believe. But difficulty and suffering, they take us down a different path, a different way of thinking, of feeling, of growing. Have you ever suffered? And what was formed out of that suffering? Now, I am not saying that there is something essentially ennobling about suffering. I am not saying that. Some suffering is simply that, suffering, and we want to exit from it as quickly as we possibly can. But there are those who have been ennobled by suffering. If we go back into our history in this country, President Franklin Roosevelt, when he came back out of his experience with being struck with polio, he came back a changed man. He grew up in a privileged family, one of the most privileged in the country. And after being struck with polio, he was much more deeply compassionate and empathetic. Much more recently, on April 16th of 2013, 27-year-old Jeff Bauman was standing at the finish line at the Boston Marathon, cheering his girlfriend Erin on to the finish. And as she just came into view, and as she did, a bomb exploded at his feet. And he lost both legs from the knees down. And in his book, titled Stronger, he writes of his experience in the past year of discovering within himself a strength he never knew existed. Is he glad that he lost his legs? Of course not. Was something born out of the experience in him? A deeper awareness? A more profound grounding in this life? According to Jeff, yes. Have you ever suffered? And what was formed out of that suffering? Shannon Thomas, from our own congregation, with both humility and humor, considers herself something of an expert on suffering. And as many of you know, several months ago she spent 21 days in the jungles of Belize. And as she went into the jungle, she had only 3 things. She had her partner, Cass. She had a knife. And they had a fire starter. Nothing more. Not even clothing. This was for the program, the Discovery Channel program, titled Naked and Afraid. And before she left, again and again, people would ask her, "Why are you doing this? Why are you leaving your comfortable life to go into the jungle with a stranger for 3 weeks with virtually nothing? Why would you do this?" And her standard response was, "I have a tremendous background in survival skills. In fact, she used to teach survival skills at a survival school for years, and she lived in a cabin out in the woods. No plumbing, no electricity. It was a very raw experience. But she still drove to the grocery store. You know, she couldn't snare a rabbit. She said, "This gives me an opportunity to test those skills, to see where I am." But that was just the surface reason. There was a much deeper reason for her saying yes to this experience. When Shannon was a young girl, she was fraught with fears and insecurities. And as she moved into her adult life, she continued to have tremendous fears around security issues. And when she turned 30, in her early 30s, she had her 2 children, Autumn and Solon. One of the best things that ever happened in her life. But something else happened. Those fears and insecurities got magnified. More responsibility. The fears increased. The insecurities broadened. By the way, she knows and is good with my sharing this with you. On some inner level, Shannon knew that there was a resistance in her, a reticence in her to fully claim her personal power. And she also intuited, with the help of some friends, she intuited that this challenging experience that she was offered might just expose and expunge this blockage in her. She might find some relief and release. She never fully cried, sobbed on camera. But on day four, her partner Cass was going off on a hunting expedition. And so the film crew left with him. That was a lot more interesting than her sitting at the campfire. And she was alone. And she cried deeply and heavily. She cried and she prayed. She prayed for the strength to endure the full 3 weeks. This was day 4. Even then, she was beginning to feel everything in her body breaking down. Starvation breaks down your internal organs, literally. The body can go 21 days. 21 days.